They called her the broken mirror of the Sterling family. For 10 years, Mina Vance was told that the jagged scar running down her cheek made her unlovable, unwanted, and destined to die a spinster. Her aunt, the cruel Lady Agatha, whispered daily that she was ugly, hiding her away in the attic like a shameful secret while parading her own daughter before society. But destiny has a funny way of balancing the scales. They thought the most powerful man in England, the Duke of Ashbourne, wanted a perfect porcelain doll. They were wrong. He was looking for the woman who saved his life when no one else was watching. This is the story of how the rejected girl became the Duchess, and how the family that tormented her faced the brutal hammer of karma. The year was 1884, and the London fog clung to the cobblestones of Mayfair like a damp shroud. Inside the imposing townhouse at number 42 Wimpole Street, the atmosphere was far colder than the air outside. "Stand still, you wretched girl. You've pricked me." Mina Vance pulled the needle back instantly, murmuring a quiet apology. She kept her head down, her dark hair falling forward like a curtain. It was a calculated move. She knew that if she exposed the left side of her face, the tirade would only worsen. "Look at you," Lady Agatha Sterling sneered, looking at her reflection in the grand vanity mirror, while Mina hemmed the heavy velvet of her gown. "Hiding behind your hair. It's for the best, I suppose. We wouldn't want to frighten the postman, let alone a suitor. Not that you'll ever have one." Mina's hand didn't tremble. It had been years since her aunt's venomous words had the power to make her cry. Tears were a luxury Mina could not afford, since her parents died in that carriage accident, the same accident that had left the angry, jagged scar running from her left ear down to her jawline. Mina had been a ward of her Aunt Agatha. Legally, she was family. In reality, she was an unpaid seamstress, a housekeeper, and a punching bag for the frustrations of Lady Agatha and her spoiled daughter, Letitia. "Mother!" Letitia burst into the room, her cheeks flushed, holding a crisp, cream-coloured envelope. "It's here. The invitation. The Duke of Ashbourne is back from the Americas." Mina paused her stitching. Even she, isolated in the attic room most days, had heard the rumours. Julian Thorne, the Duke of Ashbourne. He was one of the wealthiest men in the empire, possessing vast shipping lines, and a reputation for being ruthlessly intelligent. He had left England 5 years ago, abruptly, following the death of his father. Now he had returned to take his seat in the House of Lords, and rumour had it, to find a wife. "Let me see." Agatha snatched the invitation, her eyes scanning the gold-embossed calligraphy. "A masquerade ball. 2 weeks from now. This is it, Letitia. This is your destiny." Agatha turned her sharp, predatory gaze back to Mina, who was still kneeling on the floor. "Mina, finish the hem. Then I need you to take the carriage designs to the dressmaker on Bond Street. We need new gowns. Something breathtaking for Letitia. Something that says Duchess." "And me, Aunt Agatha?" Mina asked, her voice soft but steady. "The invitation says the Sterling family. Am I not to accompany you?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Letitia let out a cruel, high-pitched giggle, covering her mouth with a lace handkerchief. Agatha walked over to Mina, crouching down so their faces were level. She reached out and brushed Mina's hair behind her ear, exposing the scar, the pale, raised skin that marred her otherwise striking features. "Oh, Mina," Agatha said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "Look at this. Do you really think a man like Julian Thorne, a man who has seen the beauties of the New World, would want to look at this? You are ugly, child. You are damaged goods. If I took you to that ball, you would be the laughing-stock of London. I am protecting you." I am 23, Mina replied, pulling her face away. I have a right to be seen. You have no rights, Agatha snapped, standing up abruptly. You live under my roof out of my charity. Your father left nothing but debts. If you mention the ball again, I will throw you out onto the street, and you can see how kind the world is to a scarred beggar. Mina went back to stitching the hem, the needle diving in and out of the red velvet. She didn't argue. She knew the truth about the debts was likely a lie. Her father had been a prudent man. But she had no way to prove it. The family solicitor, Mr. Finch of the firm Blackwood and Finch, had always been dismissive of her inquiries, clearly in Agatha's pocket. But Agatha was wrong about one thing. Mina wasn't ugly, and she was done hiding. 3 days later, the London weather turned violent. A sudden storm lashed the city, turning the streets into rivers of mud. Mina had been sent to the apothecary's near Covent Garden to fetch headache powders for Letitia, who was suffering from nerves regarding the upcoming ball. Agatha had refused to let Mina take the carriage, claiming the horses needed rest for the upcoming social season. So, Mina walked, wrapped in a threadbare grey cloak, her head down against the wind. She was cutting through a narrow alleyway behind a row of high-end majestic clubs when she heard a loud crack, followed by the distressed whinny of a horse. Mina looked up. A sleek black private carriage had skidded on the slick cobblestones. The rear wheel had shattered, and the carriage was tilting precariously against a brick wall. The driver was shouting, struggling to control the frightened horses. Without thinking, Mina ran forward. She had grown up in the country before the accident. She knew horses. While the driver wrestled with the reins, Mina moved to the lead horse, grabbing the bridle near the bit. "Easy," she soothed, her voice low and calm, ignoring the rain soaking her hair. "Steady now. You're all right." She stroked the animal's muzzle, her presence commanding yet gentle. Slowly, the panic left the beast's eyes, and the carriage stopped rocking. The door of the carriage flew open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy black greatcoat. He moved with a distinct, sharp energy, ignoring the mud splashing onto his polished boots. "Is everyone intact?" he demanded. His voice was deep, authoritative, and laced with frustration. "Yes, Your Grace," the driver shouted, jumping down. "The wheel snapped. The axle might be done for." The man turned, his eyes landing on Mina. She was soaked through, her hood having fallen back, exposing her face to the grey light of the storm. For a moment, she froze. She knew she should turn her head, hide the left side of her face, as she had been trained to do. But the adrenaline held her still. He stepped closer. He was handsome, but not in the soft, powdered way of the court dandies Letitia admired. He had a strong jaw, dark stubble, and eyes the colour of steel, piercing and intelligent. He didn't look at her dress or her muddy shoes. He looked directly at her face. Mina flinched, expecting the usual recoil, the look of disgust. "You have a way with horses," the man said, his tone appreciative. "Most people would have run the other way when a carriage tips." "Panic solves nothing," Mina said, wiping rain from her forehead. "The horse was frightened, not malicious." The man paused, tilting his head slightly. He seemed to be studying her, not with judgment, but with curiosity. His gaze lingered on her scar for a fleeting second, but he didn't frown. If anything, his expression softened. "I am indebted to you, Miss—" "It doesn't matter," Mina said quickly, pulling her hood back up, shadowing her face. "I must go. My aunt will be waiting." "Wait." The man reached into his coat. He pulled out a silver coin, a sovereign, and held it out. "For your trouble." Mina looked at the coin. It was more money than she had seen in years. It could buy her a train ticket away from London. But something in her pride rebelled. She wasn't a beggar helping a rich man for scraps. She had helped because it was the right thing to do. "Keep your money, sir," Mina said, her voice firm. "Invest it in a better wheelwright. That wood was rotted through." She turned on her heel and walked away into the rain, disappearing into the fog. Julian Thorne, the Duke of Ashbourne, stood in the mud, staring after her. He still held the coin in his hand. He had spent the last week being fawned over by every debutante in London, women who giggled, flattered, and saw nothing but his title. And here was a woman in a ragged cloak, with a scar that looked like lightning across her cheek, who had saved his horses, insulted his carriage maintenance, and refused his money. "James," Julian called to his driver, a small smile playing on his lips for the first time since returning to England. "Yes, Your Grace?" "Find out who lives in this district, specifically households with a young woman of that description." "The scarred one, sir?" the driver asked, sounding confused. "The brave one," Julian corrected. "Now let's get this wheel fixed. I have a feeling the upcoming ball might not be as boring as I feared." The week leading up to the Ashbourne masquerade ball was a blur of silk, lace, and screaming tantrums. Letitia had changed her mind about her dress color 3 times, originally blue, then pink, and finally a deep crimson, which she believed would make her look regal. Mina worked until her fingers bled. She sat by the flickering candlelight of the attic, stitching gold thread into the crimson bodice. She wasn't just a seamstress. She was a ghost in her own home. However, the universe was conspiring in Mina's favor. 2 days before the ball, Agatha and Letitia went to a tea party at the estate of Lady Windermere. They left Mina behind with a list of chores that would take 3 days to complete. But Mina had a secret. For years, she had befriended the old butler, Mr. Henderson. Henderson had served Mina's father and despised Agatha, though he kept his job to survive. "Miss Mina," Henderson whispered, knocking on the attic door. "They are gone." "Thank you, Henderson," Mina sighed, putting down the needle. "I suppose I should start polishing the silver." "Actually," Henderson cleared his throat, "I thought you might like to know. The master of the house next door has returned, and he has brought a library collection that is being unloaded. Crates of books, sitting in the garden, unguarded." Mina's eyes lit up. Her one escape was reading. Her father had taught her Latin, French, and philosophy before he died. She snuck out through the servants' entrance and made her way to the shared garden wall. The townhouse next to theirs, number 44, had been vacant for years. Now, it was bustling. In the back garden, protected by a canvas tarp, were stacks of books. Mina couldn't resist. She climbed the low stone wall, hopping down into the neighbor's yard. She picked up a leather-bound volume, The Republic by Plato, but in the original Greek. A heavy choice for a Tuesday afternoon. Mina gasped, nearly dropping the book. She spun around. Standing on the terrace, holding a glass of brandy, was the man from the carriage. The raw stranger. He wasn't wearing his greatcoat now. He was in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking relaxed. "You," Mina breathed, then realized she was trespassing. I apologize. I saw the books. I didn't think anyone was home." Julian walked down the stone steps. He recognized her instantly. The cloak was gone, and the afternoon sun hit her face fully. The scar was undeniable. Most men would have looked away. Julian walked closer. "You refused my sovereign," he said, leaning against a crate. "Are you going to refuse my books, too?" "I was only looking," Mina said defensively. "I didn't steal anything." "I didn't say you did. You read Greek? My father taught me, Mina said, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. Before everything changed. It's rare to find a woman in London who cares for Plato. Most are too busy worrying about the Ashbourne ball. He watched her carefully. The ball? Mina let out a dry, bitter laugh. Yes, the center of the universe. You are not going. I am not invited, Mina lied. She was technically invited as part of the family, but she was forbidden. And even if I were, well, she gestured to her face. I am not exactly what society wants to see waltzing under the chandeliers. Julian stepped closer, invading her personal space. The intensity of his gaze made Mina's heart hammer against her ribs. Society is blind, Julian said, his voice low. They see the surface. They don't see the structure. Like my carriage wheel, they see the paint, not the rot underneath, or the strength underneath. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Mina froze. He didn't touch her, but the heat of his hand was palpable. Who are you? She whispered. She still didn't know he was the Duke. She assumed he was perhaps the Duke's secretary, or a wealthy relative staying in the house. Just a man tired of masks, he replied. Keep the book. Consider it a down payment on the debt I owe you for the horses. I can't keep it, but on one condition. What condition? Tell me your name. Mina, she whispered. Mina. He tested the name on his tongue. I am Julian. If you ever need to escape the center of the universe, my library is open to you. Before she could respond, the sound of a carriage clattering on the street signaled Agatha's return. I have to go, Mina panicked. She scrambled back over the wall, clutching the book. Julian watched her go. He took a sip of his brandy. He had met the beauties of Paris, the heiresses of New York, but none of them had intrigued him, like the girl with the scar who read Plato and calmed stampeding horses. He turned to his butler, who was standing in the doorway. Simmons. Yes, Your Grace? Send a note to the finest dressmaker in Paris. The dame, one who owes me a favor. I need something made, something unusual, and I need it delivered to the service entrance of number 42 Wimpole Street, addressed to a Miss Mina Vance. Very good, Your Grace. And the measurements? Julian closed his eyes, visualizing her frame. I have a good eye for dimensions, Simmons. We will make it work. The night of the ball arrived. The Sterling household was in chaos. Letitia looked like a confectionery shop explosion in her crimson dress. It was tight, laced to within an inch of her life, covered in bows and pearls. Do I not look magnificent? Letitia preened. You look like a queen, Agatha lied smoothly. Now, Mina, fetch my shawl. Mina handed over the shawl. She was dressed in her usual grey woolen dress, blending into the wallpaper. Don't wait up for us, Agatha sneered. We shall be late. The Duke will likely insist on a private supper once he sees Letitia. They swept out of the house, leaving Mina in the silence of the hallway. She went upstairs to her attic room, sitting on her narrow bed. She picked up the Republic. She tried to read, but the words swam. She wanted to go. Just once. To see the music. To feel the lights. A knock came at the back door, the servants' entrance. Mina went down, expecting a delivery of coal. Instead, a courier stood there, holding a large, flat box wrapped in silver paper. For Miss Mina Vance, the man said, tipping his cap. There must be a mistake. No mistake, miss. He handed it to her and vanished into the night. Mina carried the box to the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon. Inside lay a gown of a color she had never seen, not quite blue, not quite silver. It was the color of moonlight on water. The fabric was silk chiffon, light as air, and on top of the dress lay a mask. It was a masterpiece of silver filigree, designed to cover the upper face and the left cheek, completely concealing her scar, but leaving her mouth and jaw free. There was a note, no signature, just one line of text, because the structure matters more than the paint. Mina gasped. Julian, the man from next door. He knew. Miss Mina. Henderson the butler appeared, grinning from ear to ear. I took the liberty of keeping the carriage driver on standby. He owes me a favor from a poker game. Henderson, I can't. If Aunt Agatha sees me, then don't let her see you, Henderson winked. That mask is perfect. You won't be Mina the maid tonight. You will be a mystery. Mina touched the silk. For 10 years she had been told she was a monster. Tonight, she would be a moth flying toward the flame. I'll do it, she whispered. The Ashbourne ballroom was a kaleidoscope of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers, and swirling pastel silks. The elite of London society had gathered, desperate for a glimpse of the Duke. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. Lady Agatha Sterling stood near the orchestra, fanning herself aggressively. Beside her, Letitia looked like a candied apple in her tight crimson gown, her eyes darting around the room. "Where is he?" Letitia hissed. "I've been standing here for an hour. My feet hurt." "Patience," Agatha snapped. "He must make an entrance. Stand up straight. Stick your chest out." Suddenly, the murmur of the crowd died down. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. But it wasn't the Duke who appeared. It was a woman. She stood at the top of the stairs, a vision in moonlight-colored silk that seemed to ripple like water with every breath. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate braid woven with silver thread. But it was the mask that stole the breath of the room, a delicate silver filigree masterpiece that covered the left side of her face, sparkling under the gaslights. "Who is that?" Letitia gasped, jealousy flaring instantly. "Some foreign countess, perhaps." Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Look at that dress. That costs more than our house." Mina's heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She gripped the velvet railing. "Just walk," she told herself. One foot in front of the other. She descended the stairs. The crowd parted for her, a sea of whispers. She felt exposed, yet for the first time, powerful. The mask didn't just hide her scar, it highlighted her eyes, her lips, the grace of her movement. At the bottom of the stairs, a man stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. He wore formal evening wear, a black velvet coat with the crest of Ashbourne pinned to his lapel. But Mina recognized the stride, the tilt of the head. It was Julian, the neighbor. Her breath hitched. He is the Duke. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man she had lectured about horse car, the man she had quoted Plato to in the garden, was the most powerful peer in England. He walked straight toward her, ignoring the hundreds of debutantes trying to catch his eye. He stopped inches from her. "You came," he said, his voice low, intimate, meant only for her. "You lied," she whispered back, her voice trembling slightly. "You said you were tired of masks, yet you are the biggest deceiver of them all, Your Grace." Julian smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that made Letitia, watching from 10 feet away, nearly faint. "I never said I wasn't the Duke. I just didn't let it be the first thing you knew about me. May I have this dance, Mina?" He didn't say, "My lady" or "Miss." He used her name. He held out his hand. Mina hesitated for a fraction of a second, then placed her gloved hand in his. The orchestra began a waltz. Julian swept her onto the floor. They moved together effortlessly, as if they had been dancing for years. The world blurred. All Mina could see were his steel-grey eyes. "Everyone is staring," Mina murmured. "Let them stare," Julian said firmly. "For years you have been invisible. Tonight you are the only thing worth seeing. My aunt is here. If she recognizes me—" "She won't," Julian assured her, "because she doesn't truly know you. She only knows the version of you she created in her mind, the victim. She doesn't recognize the queen I am holding right now." As they spun near the edge of the dance floor, Agatha's jaw dropped. That movement," Agatha whispered to Letitia. "That posture. It looks like— No, it's impossible." "It's who?" Letitia demanded. "The maid. Mina. That ugly wretch." Letitia laughed loud enough for people to turn. "Mother, have you gone mad? Mina is in the attic crying over a needle." "I know my own niece." Agatha's eyes turned cold and predatory. She saw the distinctive birthmark on Mina's right shoulder, visible just above the neckline of the gown. The little thief. She stole that dress. She must have. Agatha began to push through the crowd, her face twisted in rage. She wasn't going to let her servant outshine her daughter. She was going to destroy her. The Ashbourne ballroom had dissolved into a blur of gold and crystal. For Mina, the world had narrowed down to the span of a single heartbeat, the space between her hand and Julian's shoulder. The orchestra, hidden behind a screen of palm fronds and white roses, began to play the Blue Danube. The melody swept through the room, a river of sound that seemed to lift Mina off the polished parquet floor. She had expected to be terrified. All her life, she had been told to shrink, to hide, to occupy the smallest possible space in any room. But in Julian's arms, she felt expansive. He didn't dance like the society men Letitia fawned over, men who counted their steps and looked over their partner's shoulder for someone more important. Julian danced with an intense, focused energy. He held her as if she were something precious, something rare that he had finally found after a long search. "You are trembling," Julian murmured, his voice a low rumble against the swell of the violins. His steel-grey eyes were locked onto hers through the eye slits of her silver mask. "I am waiting for the clock to strike midnight," Mina whispered back, her voice tight. "I am waiting for the carriage to turn back into a pumpkin and for my aunt to drag me home by my hair." Julian's grip on her waist tightened slightly, possessive and reassuring. "Let the clock strike. Time has no authority here. You are not a guest, Mina. You are the reason this ball exists." They spun past a cluster of dowagers, their diamonds flashing under the gaslights. Mina saw the envy in the eyes of the other women, women with flawless skin and perfect pedigrees. They were looking at her dress, the moonlight silk that flowed like water, and they were looking at the Duke. "They are wondering who I am," Mina said. "They are inventing titles for me. A French countess? An Italian heiress?" "Let them wonder," Julian smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern face. "Mystery is a currency in London. Tonight you are the wealthiest woman in the room." But the spell could not last forever. On the periphery of the dance floor, standing near the punch bowl, Lady Agatha Sterling was watching. Her face was a mask of calculated fury. She had been sipping champagne, trying to ignore the fact that the Duke had walked right past her daughter, Letitia. "Mother!" Letitia whined, tugging on Agatha's sleeve. "It's not fair. Look at her dress. It's shimmering. Why didn't I get a dress like that?" Agatha didn't answer. Her eyes were narrowed, tracking the movement of the mystery woman. There was something familiar about the way the woman held her head, a certain stubborn tilt of the chin. And then, As Julian spun his partner beneath the great chandelier, the light caught a birthmark on the woman's right shoulder. A small, distinctive mark shaped like a crescent moon. Agatha froze. She knew that mark. She had seen it 1,000 times while screaming at her niece to scrub the floors harder. The glass of champagne in Agatha's hand shattered, snapping at the stem. "It's her!" Agatha hissed, the realization turning her blood to ice. "The little thief." "Who?" Letitia blinked. "Mina!" Agatha's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "She stole your future, Letitia. She stole the money from the housekeeping jar, bought that dress, and dared to humiliate us." Agatha didn't think. She didn't calculate. Blind rage took the wheel. She began to shove her way through the crowd, her elbows sharp, her face purple with indignation. The shattering silence. The music was building to a crescendo when the scream tore through the air, sharper and more dissonant than any violin. "Stop this instant!" The conductor, startled, dropped his baton. The music died in a discordant jangle. The dancers froze in place, a tableau of confused aristocrats. Julian stopped moving, but he didn't let go of Mina. He pulled her closer to his chest, shielding her from the sudden silence. Agatha burst into the center of the circle, panting heavily, with Letitia trailing behind her like a crimson shadow. "You!" Agatha pointed a shaking, accusing finger at Mina. "You deceitful, lying little viper!" A collective gasp went through the room. Lord Harrington, the city's mayor, stepped forward. "Lady Agatha, please. You are making a scene." "I am exposing a fraud," Agatha shrieked, playing to the audience. She turned to the crowd, spreading her arms wide. "You all admire this woman. You think she is nobility? Look closer. She is nothing but a servant, a charity case I took into my home out of the goodness of my heart." Letitia smirked, sensing blood in the water. "She's our maid. She probably scrubbed the floors this morning." Mina felt the old panic rising, a cold tide in her chest. The eyes of 500 people were boring into her. She wanted to run. She wanted to vanish. But then she felt Julian's hand move from her waist to her hand, interlacing their fingers. He wasn't embarrassed. He was furious, but not at her. "Lady Agatha," Julian's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. "You will lower your voice in my home." "Your Grace, you have been deceived," Agatha cried, stepping closer, her eyes manic. "This creature is not fit to touch the hem of your coat. She is wearing a mask because she is hiding her shame. She is a monster, a scarred, ugly spinster." The word monster hung in the air, ugly and brutal. "Show them," Agatha demanded, lunging forward. "Take off the mask, Mina. Let the Duke see what he is really holding. Let him see the broken mirror." Mina flinched. The mask was her shield. It was the only thing standing between her and the ridicule she had endured for 10 years. Julian released her hand and stepped between the women. He towered over Agatha. "If you take one more step, madam, I will have you thrown out into the street." "No, Julian." The voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Julian turned. Mina had stepped away from him. She stood alone in the center of the ballroom floor. She was trembling, yes, but her head was high. "She wants them to see," Mina said, her voice gathering strength. "So let them see." Mina reached up. Her fingers found the silk ribbon behind her head. The room held its breath. Mina pulled the knot. The silver filigree mask came loose. She lowered it slowly, revealing the left side of her face. The scar was there. The jagged, pale line that ran from her temple, down her cheek to her jawline. It was stark against her flushed skin. It was the mark of the carriage accident that had taken her parents. It was the mark of her survival. Agatha let out a triumphant cruel laugh. "See? Look at her. Who could love a face like that? It's repulsive." Agatha looked around, expecting the crowd to join her. She expected laughter. She expected disgusted gasps. But there was silence. The crowd wasn't laughing. They were staring, but not with disgust. They saw a woman standing in a pool of light, vulnerable yet defiant. They saw the cruelty of the aunt who would mock her own flesh and blood. Julian walked back to Mina. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Agatha. He looked only at her. He reached out and cupped her face, his hand covering the very scar Agatha had mocked. "Agatha calls this a flaw," Julian said, his voice ringing out clearly to the rafters. "I call it a map." A map?" Agatha stammered, confused by the lack of mockery. "A map of courage," Julian declared. "I was there when this woman stopped a stampeding carriage in a rainstorm to save a horse, while men ran for cover. I have watched her read philosophy, while you, Lady Agatha, read gossip columns. I see no monster here." Julian leaned down. In front of the entire peerage of England, the Duke of Ashbourne pressed his lips tenderly to the scar on Mina's cheek. It was a kiss of reverence, a kiss of claim. A woman in the back sobbed. It was the sentimental Duchess of York. Then someone started clapping. Then another. "No!" Agatha screamed, her reality fracturing. "This is wrong. She is penniless. She is a burden. She stole that dress with my money." The hammer of justice. Julian pulled away from Mina, keeping one arm wrapped firmly around her. He turned to face Agatha, and the tenderness in his eyes was replaced by a glacier-cold fury. "Stole, you say?" Julian repeated the word. "An interesting choice of vocabulary, Lady Agatha." He snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the pillars, 3 men emerged. One was the Chief Constable of London. The other was a terrified-looking man in a rumpled suit, Mr. Finch, the Sterling family solicitor. Agatha's face went the colour of old ash. "Mr. Finch, what are you doing here?" "I asked him to bring the ledgers," Julian said, his voice deadly smooth. "And I asked the Crown Prosecutor to review them." Julian took a black leather book from the constable and held it up. "For 10 years, Julian addressed the room, turning the masquerade into a courtroom. "Lady Agatha has claimed that Mina's father died in debt. She claimed she was a saint for taking in a pauper." "It's true!" Letitia squeaked. "It is a lie!" Julian roared, slamming the book shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Mr. Vance left his daughter an inheritance of £50,000, a fortune, and for 10 years you, Agatha Sterling, have been forging signatures to siphon that money into your own accounts." "Lies!" Agatha shrieked, looking for an exit, but the crowd had formed a solid wall of velvet and judgment. "You have no proof." "Mr. Finch?" Julian prompted. The little solicitor stepped forward, wringing his hands. I am sorry, Agatha. They found the hidden account, the one in Switzerland. They offered me immunity if I testified. It's over." Agatha staggered back, clutching her chest. "You traitor!" "And the house," Julian continued, relentless. "Number 42 Wimpole Street. You told Mina she was a guest in your home, but the deed proves the house was purchased with Mina's trust fund. You have been forcing the owner of the house to serve you tea in her own drawing room." The crowd murmured angrily. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. To steal a fortune was one thing. To enslave the niece you stole it from was a level of villainy that shocked even the most cynical aristocrats. "She is ugly!" Agatha screamed, her mind snapping, reverting to her only weapon. "She is scarred! She doesn't deserve the money! I needed it for Letitia! Letitia is beautiful!" "Letitia," Julian looked at the girl in the red dress. is wearing a necklace bought with money meant for Mina's education. That is not beauty. That is theft." Julian nodded to the chief constable. "Take them." "You can't," Agatha wailed as the officers grabbed her arms. "I am a lady. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," the constable grunted, locking handcuffs onto her wrists, the cold steel biting into her skin. "Letitia!" Agatha screamed as she was dragged toward the doors. "Do something!" Letitia looked around wildly, seeing the disgust on the faces of the men she had flirted with earlier. She saw the Duke looking at her as if she were a roach on his boot. She burst into tears, not of remorse, but of self-pity, as a second officer took her by the arm. "Mina!" Agatha shouted, fighting the officers, her hair coming loose from its pins. "Tell them to stop. I am your blood. I am your family." Mina watched them. She stood in the circle of Julian's arm, the scar on her face exposed to the world. She looked at the woman who had tormented her for a decade. "Family," Mina said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent room, "does not keep you in the dark. Family does not make you hate your own reflection." She turned her back on her aunt. "Take them away." As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind the screaming women, a heavy silence hung over the room. Then, the conductor, a wise man who knew when to break the tension, tapped his baton. "A waltz, Your Grace?" Julian looked down at Mina. "Are you all right?" Mina looked up at him. Her eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling, a real, unburdened smile. "I have no mask," she said. "You never needed one," Julian replied. He swept her back into the dance, and as they spun, the crowd didn't whisper. They didn't gossip. One by one, the other couples joined the floor, dipping and bowing in respect to the woman who had walked through the fire and come out as a queen. The morning sun over London did not bring warmth to the Sterling household. It brought the cold, hard gavel of justice. The scandal of the Ashbourne ball had not just rippled through society. It had crashed like a tidal wave. By 8 a.m., the London Gazette had already printed a special edition. The headline was not about the Duke's return, but rather, "The Cinderella of Wimpole Street, How a Stolen Inheritance Birthed a Duchess." Inside number 42. Wimpole Street, the silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of heavy boots on timber floors. Mina sat in the parlour, a room she had only been allowed to enter to dust for the last 10 years. She sat on the velvet chaise, her hands folded in her lap. Across from her sat Julian, looking impeccably fresh, despite the late hours of the previous night, and a team of 3 solicitors from the Crown Prosecutor's office. Lady Agatha and Letitia were not sitting. They were standing by the fireplace, watched closely by 2 constables. Agatha looked 10 years older than she had the night before. Her makeup was smeared, her finery replaced by a hastily donned travel dress. Letitia was weeping into a handkerchief, her eyes swollen and red. "The forensic audit of the accounts is complete, Your Grace," the lead solicitor, Mr. Bramwell, stated, placing a thick stack of papers on the table. "It is worse than we thought. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was systematic embezzlement, dating back to the week of Mr. Vance's death." Mina felt a chill run through her. She looked at her aunt. "You started stealing before my father was even in the ground?" Agatha sneered, her pride fighting a losing battle with her terror. "He owed me. He always had the luck, the charm. I was left with a drunkard husband and a useless daughter. I took what was owed to me." "Mother!" Letitia gasped, horrified. "Useless!" "Silence!" Agatha snapped. She turned her venomous gaze to Mina. "And you ungrateful little wretch. I fed you. I clothed you." "You clothed me in rags," Mina said, her voice steady. She stood up, and for the first time she felt tall. "You made me a servant in the house my father paid for. You told me I was ugly every single day, so that I wouldn't look in the mirror and realize I had the power to stop you." Julian stood up, his presence filling the room with a terrifying calm. "Mr. Bramwell, what are the terms?" "Fraud, theft, and forgery," Bramwell listed. "However, Miss Vance has requested leniency regarding prison time, provided full restitution is made." "I don't want them in prison," Mina said softly, looking at the window where the rain had started to fall. "Prison is too easy. It provides a roof and a bed. I want them to understand what the world is really like." Julian nodded. "The assets of Lady Agatha Sterling are seized. The jewellery, the carriage, the personal accounts. Everything is liquidated to pay back the estate of Mina Vance. You are to vacate this property immediately. You may take one trunk of personal clothing. No silk, no jewellery." "One trunk?" Letitia wailed. "But where will we go?" "I believe," Julian said, his eyes cold as steel, "that the East End has several affordable boarding houses for those willing to work. There is a vacancy at the Whitechapel textile mill. I have taken the liberty of putting your names down for the morning shift. It starts at 4 a.m. "I am a lady!" Agatha shrieked, lunging forward, only to be restrained by the constable. "I will not work in a mill." "Then you will starve," Julian said simply. "Get them out of my sight." The eviction. The eviction was a spectacle. As the constables escorted Agatha and Letitia out the front door, a crowd had gathered. These weren't the aristocrats of the night before. These were the neighbours, the shopkeepers, the people Agatha had sneered at for years. Mina watched from the balcony, Julian's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. She watched as the bailiffs tossed Letitia's collection of French perfumes into a crate for auction. She watched Agatha clutch a small, battered leather bag, the only thing she was allowed to keep, looking at the house with a mix of hatred and devastation. "Look at her face," a baker shouted from the street. "That's the scar of greed, that is." It was a cruel irony. Agatha had spent years mocking Mina's physical scar, but now Agatha wore the invisible, permanent brand of shame. As the carriage, a hired hackney, not their private coach, pulled away, carrying them toward the smog and grime of the East End, Mina didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a decade. "Are you all right?" Julian asked, turning her to face him. "I don't know," Mina admitted, tears pricking her eyes. "I feel light, like gravity has changed." "It has." Julian kissed her forehead. "Now come inside. We found something else in the safe. Something she hid from you." The letters in the dark, back in the library, on the mahogany desk, lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Agatha intercepted these," Julian explained gently. "They are from your father's friends, from his solicitor before Finch was bribed. And this one." He handed her a thick envelope. It was dated 1 week before the accident that killed her parents. Mina opened it with trembling fingers. It wasn't a legal document. It was a letter from her father. "My dearest Mina, if you are reading this, something has happened. But know this, I have seen the way you look at the world. You have a kindness that this family lacks. Do not let your Aunt Agatha break your spirit. I have set aside a trust for you, tied to the deed of the house, so that no matter what, you will always have a home. You are beautiful, my child, inside and out. Never let the world tell you otherwise." Mina broke down. For years, Agatha had told her that her father died disappointed in her, that he had left them penniless because of his gambling. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted lie to keep her submissive. She pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing. Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried out the grief of 10 lost years. She stole my history, Mina whispered into his coat. She stole my goodbye. She tried, Julian corrected fiercely, but she failed. You have it back now, and you have me. I promise you, Mina, you will never be alone again. The wedding of the century. 3 months later, the wedding of the Duke of Ashbourne to Miss Mina Vance was the only topic of conversation in England. The Queen herself had sent a gift, a brooch of sapphire and diamonds. The ceremony was held at St. George's, Hanover Square. The church was overflowing with flowers, white roses and lilies, filling the air with a scent so sweet it made the head spin. But the most talked about detail was the bride's appearance. Society expected Mina to cover her face. They expected a heavy veil, or perhaps she would turn her profile to the congregation to hide the scar. Mina refused. She wore a gown of ivory lace, high-necked and long-sleeved, fitting her slender frame perfectly. Her hair was swept up, adorned with the Ashbourne tiara, and she wore no veil. As the organ music swelled, the triumphant notes of Handel, she walked down the aisle. She walked with her head held high, looking left and right, meeting the gazes of the hundreds of people who had once whispered about her. She saw the curiosity in their eyes turn to awe. Because Julian was right. She wasn't ugly. The scar, a pale, lightning bolt running down her cheek, gave her face a story. It gave her an intensity that the porcelain dolls of the court lacked. When she reached the altar, Julian turned to her. His expression was one of such raw, unfiltered adoration that several ladies in the front row reached for their smelling salts. "Dearly beloved," the bishop began. Mina didn't hear the rest. She was lost in Julian's eyes. "I, Julian, take thee, Mina," he said, his voice deep and resonating through the stone cathedral. "To love and to cherish, to be my equal, to be my heart." "I, Mina, take thee, Julian," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "To love and to cherish, in the storm and in the calm." When they kissed, a cheer went up that could be heard from the street outside. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a coronation of the underdog. The bitter bread of reality. While champagne flowed in Mayfair, a very different scene was playing out in the slums of Whitechapel. The air in the textile mill was thick with cotton dust, clogging the lungs and stinging the eyes. The noise of the looms was deafening, a relentless clack-clack-clack that hammered against the skull. Lady Agatha Sterling, now known simply as Aggie, coughed violently as she fed raw cotton into the hungry machine. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were raw, blistered, and stained with grease. Her back ached with a constant throbbing pain. "Move it, old woman!" the foreman shouted, slamming a cane against the side of her loom. "You're slowing down the line. Quota is 50 spools by sunset, or no pay." I am trying," Agatha gasped, sweat dripping down her face. She looked at her reflection in the dirty glass of the window. She was gaunt, grey, and unrecognizable. Across the aisle, Letitia was weeping silently as she worked. Her once shiny hair was matted and covered in lint. She had sold her last remaining ring 2 weeks ago, just to buy bread and coal. "Mother," Letitia whispered during a brief lull. "I saw a newspaper in the trash bin. Today is the day." "Don't," Agatha hissed. "Don't say it." "She married him," Letitia said, a vacant look in her eyes. "She's the Duchess. They say she wore the tiara, the one with the diamonds." Agatha squeezed her eyes shut. She remembered that tiara. She had once dreamed of Letitia wearing it. "It's not fair," Agatha muttered, the old bitterness rising up, but it was weak now, starved of power. "It should have been us. It's our fault," Letitia said softly, a realization that had been months in the coming. "We were monsters, Mother, and now we are in hell." Agatha didn't reply. She couldn't, because deep down, in the place she refused to look, she knew her daughter was right. She looked down at her scarred, bleeding horns. Karma had finally delivered a mirror she couldn't look away from. 6 months later. The Garden of Truth. The sun was setting over the Ashbourne country estate, casting long, golden shadows across the manicured lawns. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and jasmine. Mina sat on a stone bench near the rose garden, a leather-bound book in her lap. It was the Republic, the same copy she had taken from Julian's garden all those months ago. She heard the crunch of gravel and looked up. Julian was walking toward her, accompanied by 2 large Irish wolfhounds who bounded happily around him. He looked relaxed, his shirt collar open, looking more like the man she met in the rain than a duke. "Hiding?" he teased gently, sitting down beside her. Reflecting, she smiled, closing the book. "I received a letter today. From Mr. Finch, the old solicitor. He wrote from his prison cell." "Oh?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "Is he asking for a pardon?" "No. He wanted to tell me that my aunt passed away last week." The silence stretched between them, heavy but not sad. "Consumption," Mina continued quietly. "The conditions in the East End. Her lungs. Couldn't take it. And Letitia. She has joined a convent in Ireland. She wrote to me, asking for forgiveness. She said she wants to spend the rest of her life in silence, repenting." Julian took Mina's hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles. "How do you feel?" "I feel peace," Mina said, surprising herself. "I don't feel happy that she is dead, but I feel safe. For the first time, I know they can never hurt me again. The story is over." "No." Julian shook his head, lifting her hand to his lips. "The nightmare is over. Our story is just beginning." He stood up and pulled her to her feet. The golden light of the sunset hit her face, illuminating the scar. It didn't look angry anymore. It looked like a line of gold, a mark of survival. "I have a surprise for you," Julian said, leading her toward the house. "More books? Better. Come to the nursery." Mina stopped, her hand going to her stomach. They hadn't told anyone yet. She had only suspected it herself for a few weeks. "How did you know?" she whispered. Julian smiled, that dazzling, boyish smile. "I know everything about you, Mina. I know how you breathe, I know how you walk, and I know that you are glowing." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "They said you would never marry," Julian whispered into her hair. "They said you were broken. But look at us. We are the luckiest people in the world." Mina rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought of the cold attic, the sharp needle, the years of loneliness. And then she looked out at the horizon, wide and open and full of light. "Yes," she whispered, a single tear of joy tracking down the path of her scar. "We are." The sun dipped below the horizon, ending the day, but promising a tomorrow that belonged entirely to them. And that is the incredible, emotional conclusion to The Ugly Bride and the Duke. Mina proved that a scar on the face is nothing compared to the rot of a cruel soul. Agatha and Letitia paid the ultimate price for their greed, living out their days in the very poverty they tried to force upon Mina. It's a harsh justice, but perhaps a necessary one. What did you think of the ending? Did you feel sorry for Letitia joining the convent? Or do you think she got off too easy? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comment section. If this story touched your heart, please destroy that like button. It helps us bring more dramatic romances to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications You never know what twist is coming next. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep your head high and your heart open.